Well, hello, Catherine.
Hello, Guy. How are you?
Fine, thanks. On this fine Lady Day morning.
It is indeed. It's not very fine here, though. It's
Well,
grey.
it's fine in the sense we're having a chat. I actually haven't really looked at the weather. Actually, it is quite clear. Um, well, it's interesting we're doing this on Lady Day, which is 9 months exactly before the 25th of December and 25th of March. And for obvious reasons, that was the moment that it all happened. Um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, so there are a lot of Mary sites in your book, and
There are.
maybe to honor her, we start talking about them at some point. But I think actually, just to start, let's let's speak about you personally and
Mhm.
how how you started getting interested in pilgrimage. Like, was there a kind of epiphany moment? Was it a gradual growing into something, or did you see an opportunity as an author, or like how does it work?
Well, I originally started off just researching crusading, which, of course, is an armed form of pilgrimage, because I've always been interested in how people choose to conduct certain activities and the impact that they have, particularly back home, which is what I was interested in with crusading, the sort of the home front. So I looked at it in a British context. And then from there, it spiraled out into looking obviously at journeys to the Holy Land and shrines at home more broadly. So I was primarily looking at Wales, and it's just gone on from that. And it sort of mushroomed into this study of a global pilgrimage because I assumed various things had already been done starting out as a medievalist. And when I started to look at modern material, I realized that actually, though some places are very well studied or very well known, people haven't necessarily written about them. So several of the places in the book, like Ratarapa, like the Cenote Sagrada in Mexico, there isn't a publication on pilgrimage. So I tend to go down rabbit holes, and these are the rabbit holes I went down because I found that there wasn't really what I wanted already out there. So,
Well, so I'm always fascinated by historians because they seem there's a disconnect in order to be able to do it, the thing itself, but there's also a deep interest. And so you're sort of an observer of the history and dispassionate in some way, but you're also, because this particular subject is a live one, although it's a medieval one, it's also a live one for right now, which is quite unusual maybe for some historical subjects. And I'm just wondering
no, that's very
um,
true.
how how that affects the way you approach this. Are you writing a book like this to try and connect with the modern mind, or are you just simply seeing it as a historical exercise?
I suppose it's a bit of both because lots of people see pilgrimage in medieval terms, this archetypal walking pilgrim going on a long distance journey. It's very much the sort of the Western Christian mold going to Rome, Jerusalem, Santiago de Compostela. And lots of the modern texts on it, the books that are published, are people's reflective accounts. Now, I walked the Camino, I have been to Jerusalem, and they talk about sort of spirituality and getting away from the world and connection. And of course, that is at the heart of pilgrimage. It's a religious experience. But what I wanted to show is that it's very diverse and that it also has an impact on everything around it. So whether it's politics, economics, transport, trade, tourism, and so it shaped those things, and in turn, those things have shaped how pilgrimage is conducted. So you can't separate the worldly from the spiritual, and that it has different impacts in different places through those various lens, which I think
Mm.
people don't perhaps appreciate as much.
Yeah, separating the world in the spiritual. I mean, there's sort of no point. I mean, it's all one, as they all say. Um, so
Yeah. Yes.
well, so okay. So you start the whole book with a very British pilgrimage, um, Henry II's journey to Pembrokeshire and Ireland. Why did you choose that as your starting point?
Well, I wanted to choose that one because Henry II was on a journey that wasn't a pilgrimage when he set out. It was a political military journey where he went from England across Wales because he needed to cross to Ireland because his nobles had recently conquered it, and he wanted to stamp his authority. So the journey itself is not a pilgrimage, and yet he diverts on his journey to St David's Cathedral, which is the premier pilgrimage site in Wales, on his way there, and he does the same thing on his way back. So I wanted to open with that to show that a pilgrimage doesn't necessarily have to be a journey from start to finish, that many of them were opportunistic because you were going that way, that they could have a political slant, because obviously he uses one of those to show, I have marched across Wales, look what I'm doing. And then I've got the blessing of Wales's premier religious site. And also one of them was religious, because he was giving thanks for the crossing for the Irish Sea, which is something that Henry II did a lot in his travels. So in a very short space of time, he goes from military political journey to pilgrimage to back to military journey, to pilgrimage again, then back to military journey. And he has multiple motives for doing so. So I wanted to show all of that in a very sort of short example, because Henry II went on lots of pilgrimages and for so many different reasons. He's a very good example to choose.
Interesting. So you're showing the diversity of the tradition, and the thing is, it's the roads, isn't it? Because it's the roads and the paths that he travels that are themselves used for any person wanting to get anywhere. And in life, we want to get places for all sorts of reasons and in all sorts of ways. And so I guess, he's a complex man, Henry II. He's got a lot going on. A king does operate on many levels, and therefore kind of needs to touch all of them. And what do you think about our current king and his obvious penchant for pilgrimage places, as instanced in his latest Christmas broadcasts? The last two have both had pilgrimage places in them.
They have, haven't they? Well, I suppose it'd be interesting to look at him and well, you'd have to be able to interview him for this, which I don't think would happen. But obviously he's on these journeys because it's statecraft, it's being seen by the people, it's lending his prestige and authority to different kind of places when he physically visits them. But I don't think you could say it was a pilgrimage that he was going on from the minute he got up that morning, because there's other stuff going on in the way. Does he consider those journeys pilgrimages? If so, at what point does that happen? Because I should imagine when he's traveling, he's also conducting business. How does that happen? Because he is obviously a spiritual man.
This is an interesting point, though, because your book is structured around the different places and destinations, as opposed to the actual journeys themselves. It's sort of destination focused, and that's what that is, I think, a lot of what people think pilgrimage is going to particular places. Doesn't really matter how you get there. I think some people think that the journey matters, but then others don't. Like in India, I don't think the journey matters as much as just getting to the place.
No.
For example, that's one country. Okay, well that's interesting. So right, you wanted to go around the world and not just Britain, because presumably you thought, I can really show the diversity of this tradition. Obviously, there's a diversity within Britain, and you could have focused on that. But what do you think you gained from comparing all the different traditions together?
Well, I think it showed that, as you say, that the way people conduct pilgrimage is very different. So for some, you're absolutely right that the journey is key. That's the whole point of going to Santiago de Compostela, is to follow a medieval route that was set out. And if you take the journey away, it doesn't necessarily work. The same is true of Shikoku in Japan, where you have to go around the island itself. But I wanted to show that for lots of other places, it just simply isn't the case. People really don't mind how they get there. And that includes very religious sites like Lourdes, where people go for healing. They're not really bothered about how they get to Lourdes, as long as they get there. And so that's something I wanted to show. I also wanted to show the different ways that people actually perform their pilgrimage, because that's something I'm very interested in. That in some places it was very much about going there and being in contact with something, whether it's relics, immersing yourself in the water of the Ganges, which I know you've recently done, or whether it was just being in a place where a spiritual leader of some kind had lived, such as in New Zealand. So I was trying to show that the different kinds of places that develop and the different ways that people get there. but also how they fit in their various contexts, because some pilgrimage sites are pretty local in terms of what they do. As the example again of New Zealand, very important obviously to Maoris and to New Zealand politics. And briefly, there was a little bit of an international flavour to it in the first half of the 20th century. But otherwise, it's pretty obscure. I have a friend who goes to New Zealand regularly because her sister-in-law lives there and she had never heard of it. So it's not somewhere well known. So I wanted the
Repeat the
little
name,
places
just
to show
repeat
how
the...
small cults. It's Ratana Pa. It's on the North Island in New Zealand, and it's a farmstead that developed into a pilgrimage site and still is. Whereas other places, of course, they have impact well beyond their immediate locality and their country. So Mecca is the most obvious one because it's an obligation for Muslims to go to Mecca if they can on a pilgrimage. And so that has repercussions all around the world, everything from transport systems, the new quota systems they've introduced, merchandising, transportation, the very sort of mental idea of Mecca, and then locally for Saudi Arabian politics and indeed the oil industry, which underpins the whole thing at the moment. So I was trying to show just the sheer diversity, because people tend to think of this medieval idea of pilgrimage. You're walking to an ancient site, and it isn't. It's a continually developing process, and the places themselves continually develop.
Yeah, I guess as you extend this concept of pilgrimage and like the different layers, you could take it to extreme, I suppose. You've got something like Lenin's grave, which is
Mm.
he's an atheist. So it's a sort of you're in love with your political leader, but there's like there's a definite absence of a kind of spiritual reality beyond that you are honoring by going to see him. So there's something about, and people would call that a pilgrimage. And who are we to
Yeah.
say that's not a pilgrimage? Like this, that's just, I suppose that's just us being thinking we know best. But it is interesting. It does call up quite a lot of questions because um,
It does. Yes.
where does it end? Where does it begin? When is a place of pilgrimage? When is it not a place of pilgrimage? Like it's too complicated, really, for me to give that an answer. I mean, and also if I did give an answer, I feel I'd be alienating at least one party.
Yes. I think it's about intention. So I could go to Lourdes, but I wouldn't call it a pilgrimage because I'm not there for religious reasons. I'd be there to research. And people who go to secular sites that they think have an important value for them, that they're going there for a particular intention to almost venerate Lenin. So in my book, I have the example of Buenos Aires and the burial place of Eva Perón, the wife of the former Argentinian leader. And of course, she was a secular figure, a political figure. She was cast during her lifetime as a bit of a saint, but certainly after her death, all of the propaganda coming out of the Peronist regime showed her as this saint-like figure that you could pray to, and she was a protector of the poor and children. And they did ask to have her canonized, and it didn't work. But a lot of people venerate her because of her politics, but also they see her as an almost saint-like figure. So that's,
A
I
bit
think, a
like
really good
Princess
example.
Diana, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. A sort of a secular sainthood. And you can say, well, that isn't valid because they're not saints, but lots of the early saints were never formally recognized and were challenged, in historical context. People said, why are you venerating them? They're not right. And, if one religion chooses one person or place that's holy and another chooses another, why can secular people not do the same if the reasons they're going there are pretty much the same as pilgrimage?
Yeah, I mean
So,
Saint
like I said,
Edward
it's
the
about intent.
Confessor. Sorry, yeah, Saint Edward the
Yes.
Confessor is like he was a king. I mean, like he gave his crown to a beggar. I'm sure he did some good things, but I don't know,
Mm.
same kind of idea, isn't it? That happens. So.
Yes, yes, absolutely, it does, and popularity comes and goes, and some saints cults, they flourish really briefly and then they disappear. They never really take off. So, in 13th century England, Simon de Montfort, killed in battle against the king. He was somebody who they wanted to canonize, and they said miracles are working at his tomb. Didn't take off because after a while it wasn't politically something people were interested in. So
Mm.
cults come and go.
They do. Hopefully, the cult of pilgrimage is here to stay, though.
Yeah, that's
A
not going anywhere.
cult and culture. It's sort of we're always behind ideas and visions, and I suppose what you're showing is the complexity of what this pilgrimage culture actually is, and it's not one thing, and because it's not one thing, it's probably a bit more robust over the course of history. It's less
Mm,
likely to just die because it has so many different heads, and I think that's one thing that should
yes.
be praised rather than like decried. Okay, so your book, like the title is like How Pilgrimage Changed the World. So could you, what's the best example for a kind of transformation on an individual or a whole culture of like one one pilgrimage place?
Okay, so I start the book with Taishan, which is one of the five holy mountains of China. And I did that because, in an ancient context, if you look at the various rulers of China, going on pilgrimage to Taishan was okay, you can show off your wealth and you can travel with a large retinue and all of that. That's not at all uncommon for wealthy pilgrims. But going on the pilgrimage and performing certain rituals was a way of showing that you were a legitimate ruler because you had been accepted, because you had conducted the acceptable activities. And so you get emperor after emperor undertaking pilgrimages, quite often at the start of their reign, to show that they are legitimate. Um, Not all of them do it right at the start. Some of them do this sort of, I'm not ready yet. I have not won the esteem of the people. And they go a bit later on. So it was a place that essentially underpinned imperial rule in China for centuries. And it's only really when you get to the modern age and you get the rise of communism that that stops. So I started with that one, and I find it interesting because if you take away that legitimization, what else would they have done? If pilgrimage wasn't an option to legitimize, would it have meant more war? Would it have meant propaganda of some kind? And no, instead they choose an activity that you think of as inherently peaceful and spiritual, and that's how they actually cement political military power. So lots of places and lots of rulers do that, and so that's why I started with that one, and that's how I think it changes things.
Okay, so that's interesting. The idea that there's power in pilgrimage, that because whilst it's peaceful, going to these particular places must be seen as actually giving power to the person. So once their body has moved to this place, somehow power is transferred from the place to the person, and therefore their ability to rule their state. Which, I mean,
Yes.
I guess at the heart of pilgrimage is about going to places which are more powerful or more meaningful or more um, infusing than other places. That's really,
Yes.
yeah. And the book says holy places, and I guess the mountain which gives the power to the king, there's maybe nothing better for him to do to get power. Um,
No, well, I mean, the other alternative when you're talking about drawing power from pilgrimage places is to actually physically control them. So obviously, there's conflict for centuries over who controls Jerusalem, who controls access to Jerusalem, the groups they will and won't let in, because that gives you a wider international power. And the same is true of Mecca. So throughout the Ottoman Empire, getting to Mecca was facilitated as a way of showing that the Ottoman leaders were supporting their people, were facilitating, sorry, their religious activities. And then when you get to the 20th century, you get the Saudi royal family who didn't really have a good claim to rule in Saudi Arabia uh, at all, but they managed to secure Mecca and they managed to reform and provide for pilgrims on a massive scale, particularly after the discovery of oil, not that long after. And the fact that they can do that gives them immense power. But if you take away the oil that underpins pilgrimage to Mecca, and therefore the provision for pilgrimage to Mecca isn't the way it is now. You know, they've got cooling tents and transport systems in place, things like that. What impact would they have on the people ruling Saudi Arabia? Would it collapse because it's so important to all of the Muslim world to be able to get there? So you've got the people who draw power from going to a place and the people who draw power from controlling the place that people want to get to. So it's a two-sided coin.
yeah, interesting. Different kind of power, I suppose. Different
Yeah,
kind
very
of
much so.
energy and intention behind it. Um,
Mm.
so okay, that's like the one that's the most sort of transformative, like the Chinese Holy Mountain example. But what are the most surprising ways you found pilgrimage shaping history, politics, economics? Like one we like, oh, that's really strange. Wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, strange or unusual. I'd probably say they are the smaller pilgrimages, which are about identity of small marginalized communities. So I've already mentioned Ratana Pa in New Zealand, which is obviously about Maori identity and politics, but also Saint-Marie de la Mer in southern France in the Camargue region, which is known as the Gypsy Pilgrimage, because obviously pilgrimage is seen as a journey and it's a way that people follow a path to reach a place. When you're talking about gypsy pilgrimage, these are people who are itinerant anyway, that is their culture and society. So what the pilgrimage there allows them to do is come together once a year to basically conduct a disparate lifestyle in a common social setting. So they might conduct business deals, they might arrange marriages, baptisms. It's where the band the Gypsy Kings was essentially formed, because they met together and played music around the fires as they were conducting their pilgrimage. So I found that really interesting, the way that the pilgrimage itself creates community at its core, and not necessarily because of the religion they're conducting, but because it's the only time they're in the same place for a week or so, and so they can do these sorts of things. So I found those kind of pilgrimages really interesting. Small scale, perhaps they don't have the international impact of others, but for one particular community, the European Gypsy, Roma, or traveller community, they're incredibly important.
Interesting, yeah, because in the Kumbh Mela, which I went to, the Ganges
Mm,
immersion place, Prayagraj, um, that's the same kind of thing. It's at the opposite end of the scale, which is the biggest pilgrimage of them all. But there is
yes.
a very within that there is a minority group of people who meet, which are the holy men, and they meet there once every 3, 6, 12 years, and it's sort of
Mm.
the only time they come together really as a whole. Um, and so it's interesting watching them meet each other and see each other and go round to each other's tents for feasts where they get to sort of compare notes on their monasteries over the last 6 years or whatever. And it's or 12 years or whatever. It's quite sweet. So like old men who've lived a very ascetic life, just chatting with each other. Um, it's just nice to
Quite a
see.
shock being surrounded by so many people all of a sudden.
Yeah. Um, so right. So why do you think everyone is getting interested in pilgrimage? I mean, I say everyone. I'm obviously biased because that's all I think about and I'm obsessed by it. But like, but what is going on? Because there's definitely a zeitgeist happening around it. And what are your thoughts on it? I mean, you don't have to have the answer because I'm not sure there is one. But like,
Yeah, no,
I
no, that,
love.
I suppose there would be. Okay, so my multifaceted answer, I suppose, would be that obviously throughout the early modern period into the 19th century, pilgrimage, so I'm talking here in a Western context, is in abeyance, certainly in Britain, because it's a Catholic activity and Catholicism is subject to various laws and restrictions, and you're not supposed to do it. It does actually continue quite well in Britain. It's very vibrant, but it's a subtext. Then, when you get to the end of the 19th century, you get a growth of people who, from Catholic communities, particularly, taking advantage of new transport networks, the growth of leisure time, which they didn't have before, to travel. So you suddenly get mass pilgrimages being organised all across Europe using the railways to Lourdes, to Paris-le-Monial, to La Salette, all sorts of places. The French are very good at it, and down to Rome. And so it becomes increasingly acceptable. And then it coincides, particularly after the First World War, with things like a growing acceptance in Anglican tradition, pilgrimage. It's no longer just a Catholic thing. They twist it to fit what they want to do. Um, Increasing interest in outdoors movements. You get things like the trespass up to Kinder Scout. People are interested in the outdoor lifestyle. Things like that start to develop, and again, increasing leisure time. And then when you get to the second half of the 20th century, that all develops, but then you also get this sort of international movement around the development of the Camino de Santiago, which actually had gone into decline by the end of the 19th century. So they rediscovered the relics to kickstart it again. but really takes off at the end of the 20th century because it's demarcated as a cultural route by the EU. So like the blue and yellow you see on the signs for the Camino, those colours are chosen because it was an EU route. Although the yellow initially came from the fact that one of the priests on the route had leftover paint that he was given, and that's why it's yellow. So you get growing leisure time, easier transport, and an interest in the outdoors. And then I'd say in the last few decades, certainly in the West, it's taken off because it gives you an opportunity to go away on holiday for a purpose, and it's a real way to disconnect. So if I go on holiday, chances are I'll check in on my email, and people generally expect me to, even though they're like, no, don't check it, but they do. But if you say you're going on a pilgrimage, I'll say I'm off this week for a pilgrimage or this weekend or whatever, people don't expect to hear from you. So I think it's increasing in popularity because of how connected we are in the modern world. People are able to say, I'm completely switching off, and nobody expects otherwise if what you're doing is a pilgrimage. If you say you're walking the Pennine Way, for example, they might expect you to check in, but pilgrimage is something different. It gives you permission to
It's a
completely divorce
fascinating
yourself.
answer. That's fascinating. I love the idea of pilgrimage as a password to connect you back to a older way of being that is a sort of like opposite antidote to the modern way of living. And that I've noticed this, that if you say the word pilgrimage, people start to imagine all these sorts of things of what that should mean. They say, oh, I should probably give you
Yeah,
a cup of tea, or I should probably welcome you in. Do you need a shower, or perhaps even a bed, or like a meal? They start to do this, and then you see them sort of
yeah,
churning it over. And then if you say to people, I'm on pilgrimage, like, oh, okay, fine, you're on pilgrimage. It's
yeah.
like they don't really know consciously what it means, but they
No,
sort of know they should honor it somehow. And that's a really interesting answer. Thank you. Um, so is part of what you're trying to do to actually move people on from just thinking old religious sites are what pilgrimage is about, and actually there are other ways of looking at this, and perhaps your life is even enriched by embracing a broader perspective, or are you just simply saying this is what's out there and just this I'm just like kind of doing a kind of taxonomy of pilgrimage?
it's a bit of both. I think it doesn't do anyone any harm to have their horizons broadened and to realize there's more to it than they think. But if it makes people think that the set way they had in their head of this is how you do pilgrimage doesn't necessarily have to be true, then that would be what I was aiming at. So you get lots of people, if you spend any time on internet forums about pilgrimage, or if you read any of the reviews of the various TV programs on pilgrimage, people are accused of, you cheated, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, as if there is a rule book written down. So
Yeah.
what I hope is that people read it and they understand the variety, and therefore perhaps they are more open to, okay, you want to do it that way, fine, that means something to you, not necessarily the way for these people. So I remember once reading about this amazing group of women who go on minibus pilgrimages, something like Bulgaria or Bosnia. They take a priest with them who prays in the minibus with them, but there's no way they're going to walk. They don't have the time. They're elderly, and as a spiritual experience for them, that would mean more than walking the entire Camino, which they couldn't do, because that speaks to their faith. So if people just appreciate the diversity more and are a little bit less judgmental about what counts, that would be a good thing.
Good stuff. And are there any types of pilgrimage place you wish you had included in your book and but didn't get round to, and you've thought about them
Oh,
afterwards?
thought about them afterwards. Where to start? I wanted to include Mount Athos because you can only go there if you're a man, one of the Greek islands. So I thought that would be
Yeah.
an interesting one to do. But because I'd already included Delphi, I didn't think I could do two Greek ones. Ethiopian Christian sites, which really want to do those, or some of the caves and forests in Africa are really interesting. But in terms of finding enough source material to write them up for a book, that was going to be problematic. So there are lots of interesting ones like that I would have loved to do, which I couldn't find enough material to sustain them. And then there are others I left out, like St Winifred's Well in North Wales, because I know too much about it because I've written another book about that. and condensing, 100,000 words into a chapter for one book was too painful. So I left that out on
It's
purpose.
a very painful procedure. It also means you get two books, so our readers can
Yes.
buy both. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Okay, right. You're British, and there's obviously Pembrokeshire's made. So what are you? You Welsh?
Welsh.
You Welsh? Okay, great.
Hmm.
I'm quarter Welsh too, so represent.
Excellent.
Um, yeah. So did you feel that Britain was represented fairly in the book, or were you trying to sort of try and be very like even-handed and sort of equal rights for the whole of the world, and therefore you didn't want to privilege Britain too much, or do you think it has about the right amount of representation in
Well,
the
I
book?
think for a global study, it has the right amount because we are one small country, and as pilgrimage traditions go, it's a lot richer in other places and a lot more continuous, and in many cases more ancient. So then obviously I had to boil it down to just choosing one, and I started with Henry II so that I still had a Welsh pilgrimage site in there at the start. I tried where possible to drop in examples throughout the text because I appreciate that many of the readers will be British, and also to think about examples where British pilgrims go places. So
Yeah,
even though I'm writing about the Ganges, for example, a lot of it comes from colonial writers because they're writing about what they see. One of the examples I give in the chapter on Lords is about a veteran who is healed, a Jack trainer from Liverpool, which is a great case where he is healed and can go on to work. But of course, the British Army cannot countenance the idea that he's been healed by a pilgrimage, so they continue to pay him his pension for disability. So I included British examples as and where I could find them, because I know that when you're a reader, connecting with things that feel more familiar in an unfamiliar context is more engaging, and it's an easier way into a subject. So I tried where I could.
well, that's very good to hear. Yeah, it's interesting what you say about not having a continuous tradition, and it's sort of it's like that there are richer pilgrimage traditions elsewhere. In a way, that's why I was drawn to start the British Pilgrimage Trust precisely because there wasn't, and it actually allowed a sort of going back to the drawing board approach of like, okay, well, how do we rebuild a much more open tradition that includes as many
Mm,
people as possible in a time when people are feeling quite disconnected from all the sorts of things we're talking about? And
yeah,
I think for me, there's a sort of organic grassroots version of this that's going to be born that I have very little control over. I mean, I can try and point people in certain directions, but at the end of the day, this is a movement that's beyond us, and it's about reclaiming something that is in all other cultures. And actually, it'll historically might be interesting over the next 100, 200 years to see what actually happens to British pilgrimage, because I don't know, it could go in
yeah.
any direction.
Well, it could. I mean, something I would like to do after the next two books is looking at actually how pilgrimage is reborn from the 19th century onwards, because I mean, yes, in the latter half of the 20th century into the 21st, you're talking about walking routes, all kinds of secular things as well. But there's also a period where the Catholic Church, when it regains freedoms and rights in this country, they revive medieval sites, they reconstruct them, they invent new ones, they create grottos. So they go through a period of reviving things that are already there, as you say you're aiming to do, but also inventing new places, importing things in. And that's what people are doing now in various different contexts. And one of the most interesting I find, and it's still a place of pilgrimage now, is Catholics of East Anglia, two priests. They resurrect, as they're saying, pilgrimage to Dunwich. Now, I don't know if you know Dunwich on the Suffolk coast.
Oh
It
yeah, well,
used to be a
it's because
vast medieval town.
Matthew Green wrote about it in his book, didn't he?
Yeah, gone into the sea. There's a street left with a really good pub and a few bits of ruins. But they took that and they said, this is going to be our pilgrimage site in honor of a saint who probably wasn't there, probably wasn't buried there, because they had a blank canvas, because there was nothing there to say that they were wrong. And so they import all these different ideas. You know, they're performing mass in fields and at one point in a garage for people who are on pilgrimage. So it's how they take something that isn't there and develop it as a religious site. So there's a lot to look at, which is actually the gap between sort of the end of the Reformation and, let's say, the invention of the British Pilgrimage Trust. There's a gap to write about there to fill it in, to show what's happened.
Mm. Well, that'd be great to know about it. I mean, I just feel that the story is not really even started yet somehow. It feels like what we've been doing over the last 10 years is to create a kind of map of roughly what's there already. But I don't see that map as being the end state at all. I feel that things are going to change and change and change, and people are going to start thinking differently. And I don't know whether it's going to start focusing more about music.
Yeah, what do you think people will come up with? What sort of sites do you think they want to be going to?
I think that music festivals will start to become pilgrimage destinations. That there'll be something because so many people go to them, and because pilgrimage to festival moments was always what people have done throughout history. That it's not just about the where of pilgrimage, but it's about the when. So you go to places that are special at certain moments. So like Glastonbury, for example, the biggest example in Britain is close to a very holy site. You are in Holy Land, and actually the pyramid stage is built on two ley lines crossing, very consciously, and so people could walk from Wells Cathedral or Glastonbury Tor to Glastonbury Festival, and that could be a pilgrimage, and that's the way of scaling up pilgrimage on a huge scale because that's what we don't have. We don't have scale. So how do you create it? You just tune into what's already happening.
You say scale. How much does a ticket to Glastonbury cost? Because that's going to prohibit who can even go.
Well, true, but I mean, 300,000 people go, which is more than most pilgrims in the country. I mean, I don't know. It's just if they're going already, it's only a small tweak to.
It is, but would they see it as a pilgrimage?
Well, no, but I suppose that depends. That depends on how the culture changes. The thing is, when you do go to places like the Glastonbury Festival, there is a change in the way you interact with people. It's liminal. It's a liminal social space. It's everyone's happy to be them. There's probably a lot more love in the air, or like not just be and smiling and hugging and just connection and feeling like you're joy in bliss or joyful at the music. And I think that is you're seeing the sort of whole vast array of humanity, a bit like the Prayagraj in Kumbh Mela. That's a bit of a kind of festival. It's a bit of sort of Glastonbury on a grand scale. There are music stuff popping up everywhere. There are music. I think the festival coming together of people having a celebration part of pilgrimage is, I think, probably the way forward. I mean, my mentor and person who shaped the British Pilgrimage Trust a lot, Rupert Sheldrake, he lives by the principle, which he learned from someone else, of if you want to change the world, throw a better party. So I think parties have always been a good way of changing the world, and if you can link them in with the holy place, all the better.
Yeah. Yes, I can see that.
So that would be my instinct as to the direction this is going in, but I may be wrong. The other thing, I guess, is that it could become a health thing, so that in GP surgeries, people start when they're depressed or they're lacking in direction or they get prescribed pilgrimage, for example.
Yeah, because it always has been a health thing. People going to seek healing. I mean, it still is. Told you about Holywell in North Wales, which I've written about. In the end of the 19th century, it took off massively. I mean, it always was a site of pilgrimage and of healing. But if you read newspapers from the 1880s, 1890s in particular, the numbers of cures that take place, staggering. I've got lists of thousands of pilgrims and hundreds of cures. They don't call them miracles. And they talk about whether they should have an investigation thing, like as they do at Lourdes, where they have a medical bureau, because there's so much healing. And there are also lots of letters from doctors attesting, I sent this person with this illness and now they don't have it. So, and there are various debates, things published in like the Lancet and the British Medical Journal. And then that all sort of declines by about the 1930s. So a different kind of healing, because they're not sort of doing the stress, depression, that kind of thing. But it has a long medical history, so why not?
Yeah.
That's
And I suppose
logical.
one other thing is local pilgrimages, so parish pilgrimages, like to connect communities to where they live. On Rogation
Mm,
Sunday, for example, people visiting the holy places within their parish and just sort of reconnecting with the land that they're actually from rather than venturing far out. And it's a way of bringing people together. Another
yeah.
party situation where they have, a nice lunch in the churchyard or something. I don't know, maybe a bit of
No,
dancing,
no,
maybe
absolutely.
that sort of thing. And
Plenty of historical pilgrimages where they do that. Yeah,
yeah,
why not?
okay, moving on. So there are places from Japan to Mexico to China to Buenos Aires. Despite the distances, what are the things that seem to connect them all, the pilgrimage traditions across the world?
Okay, what connects them all? Um, what connects them all is that they are all important to people for multiple reasons. That no pilgrimage site is just for one thing. So they are, some places people go for healing politics because they want help conceiving a child. Then you look at another one, and it might be somewhere you go in times of illness, when your business is failing, or because you're revering somebody with who is a martyr to your faith. So it might be a sign of your devotion. So that all pilgrimage sites are very, very multifaceted, and also that all pilgrimage sites have evolved significantly. Even the ones that haven't lasted for that long, that might have only existed, throughout the 20th century, as in Buenos Aires, as in Ratana Pa. Lourdes, of course, it's less than 200 years old, and they change massively. That they build, they demolish. If you've ever looked at maps of Mecca and worked out how that clock tower hotel is there, they knock down a mountain to do it. So it's amazing the impact that they have. So they're continually evolving and they're incredibly multifaceted, and that's true of all of them. Something I found interesting though is the way pretty much all, not all of them, but many of them are. One thing that can be central is making an offering of some kind, whether you're casting things into the Ganges or whether you're making an offering at a shrine. And what I find interesting is if you look at the example of Chichen Itza in Mexico, which is a giant sinkhole in the forest, what archaeologists have found, they had to dive because it's full of water, obviously, are lots of offerings, carved jade, folded gold carvings, things like that. And yet, Mexico was divorced from medieval Europe, where offerings were made. And you get that same desire to give in return for asking, even when places can't have had a shared tradition, it still takes place. So I find that interesting that those things that must have emerged independently of one another are still true.
That is fascinating, yeah. And I love the idea that offering is giving and being grateful and is is at the core. Because it is always
Mm.
often does come back to gratitude, our own spiritual practices. Okay, so this book, how has what so it's obviously from an intellectual basis, you've discovered a lot of things, but how has it helped
Mhm.
your understanding of pilgrimage, of life, of your own place within the universe? Like, what's the purpose for you as a person, as an individual soul? Like, what's it helped you learn more about the human condition? And
That is a good question. I think it's helped me appreciate more the way, how and why people develop religious sites for themselves. So, I've talked a lot about the politics of it and people developing it for those kinds of reasons, but the way that people clearly want a religious site, even when one isn't necessarily intended. So, if I take the example of Iona as a small island off the Scottish coast, um, and the reason it is so famous and people go there is because it's where St. Columba went and founded a religious settlement because he wanted to get away from the world. And actually, he and his early successors, they didn't want people turning up to Iona. That's not what they were trying to do. And yet, people wanted to go there so much that they turned it into this pilgrimage center even though that was not the intention, because it suited what they wanted. So I find it very interesting the way that people will create meaning where there might not be any for various reasons, which again speaks to what we said about how will pilgrimage
Mm.
develop, and then it's
Well,
continually
like
evolving.
Dobby's grave. There's in Harry Potter,
Yes,
the Dobby the
yes,
house elf. There's now this grave, and it's this huge National Trust managed.
yeah,
It's a nightmare for
mm,
them, I think, because I basically just have all this
yeah.
stuff appearing on this beach where his grave is. Um, and actually, when you say it, it doesn't actually sound too crazy. Like, I mean, I'd go to Dobby's grave. Like, it's an
I would
interesting thing.
too.
It's
Yeah,
yeah, and I think that show that sort of makes you realize there's sort of it's to do with the energy of Dobby, like the vibe of Dobby, and what you're
it
connecting with, or
is. But would you and I be going to Dobby's grave because it's Dobby's grave, or would we be going to Dobby's grave because we're interested in seeing the phenomenon of pilgrimage that's spun up around Dobby's grave?
I would be interested to go for both reasons. I genuinely would be interested about tuning in with Dobby because
I love that we're having this conversation about a fictional character.
yeah, but the
Yeah,
thing is,
well,
fiction only has value if it touches upon truth.
mm, yeah, that's what he stands for, isn't it? The
Yes, it's what he
Dog
stands for, but it's like
Round
how robust is that feeling? Is that feeling quite accessible to everyone that goes? Like what myself, I mean, what does it make me feel anything? I'd like to know that. Um, I
Mm,
imagine it might actually. Anyway, next final question. Um,
okay.
the most important one really, which is getting you to sell your work. Where can listeners find your book and how can they follow your work? And tell us about all your other books that you've written and how you are very qualified to have written this book.
Okay, well, you can find Holy Places online in your usual places. It's published by Profile Books, so you can go on their website and find it there. And in all good bookshops. I'm informed it's in Waterstones and Heifers and Blackwells. And you can follow me online. I'm on, I keep calling it Twitter, but it's not Twitter, is it? It's X, at Dr Kathryn Hurlock. And the same goes for Instagram. And I'm on Blue Sky as well. So you can contact me there if you want to ask any questions, or indeed you can just Google me because you find my email address very, very easily. And what else have I done? Well, I mentioned that there's a book coming out on Winifred's Well in North Wales, which will be out either later this year or early next, which is it's an academic work, but it's a readable, accessible one, so I'm told. So that will be coming out. And then I'm mooting some ideas to look at PilgrimageAn war because I'm very interested in how it's used in
Yeah,
conflict and post-conflict. So that is hopefully
mm,
where I'm going next.
that's very interesting. I mean, St. George, St. Michael, all these kind of militaristic figures are right at the heart of I mean, in Britain, they're the patron saint of England. And
Mm,
um, it's kind of interesting. And as we move into a time of war, how much should we be honoring the warrior within us? Like, you know, how is it a good thing to go to war? Like, that's a question that I think most people find very hard to answer, and um, it's part of our spiritual tradition too, and that's kind of terrifying. But also, it is whether or not we like it, and um, that's yeah, there's a lot there.
yes, it's supposed to be a thing of peace, and yet it crops up in war an awful lot. Yes.
Yes. Mm. Well, on that note, as we head into an uncertain phase of our existence, um, thank you so much for trying to uncover a huge part of what humans have done over time and how things have shaped our culture and our world and given kings power and queens power and um, connected minority groups to small places that give them meaning and make them feel heard and understood. It's amazing what place can do, and I think a book called Holy Places: How Pilgrimage Changed the World sounds good to me, and I hope it does really well. And thank
Thank
you for
you,
your
Guy.
time.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having me.
Kathryn. Yeah.